Okay, hello Year 12. This is another video in the Buddhism course. This one is, we're doing teachings about samsara, and we've really covered all the different teachings about samsara. So we're next going to look at the kind of essay question stuff about samsara. So the essay questions are quite interesting in this part of the course because they're really about whether we need to believe in samsara. If someone's a Buddhist, do they need to believe in samsara? And can you reinterpret samsara, the teachings about samsara, in a different way, a non-literal way? And that's what that last topic there is the topic of this lesson. So the title is, if you write this down, how can teachings about samsara be interpreted as psychological or metaphorical? So as you write that, write the title down, like I say. So what is it? What's the whole idea here? So the idea is basically that it's really to do with secular Buddhism. In secular Buddhism, we've talked about before, people don't always interpret teachings about samsara as literally true. They often reject those teachings about samsara, particularly karma and rebirth. But as we'll see, that doesn't mean secular Buddhists completely ignore those teachings. What they do is often reinterpret them. So in other words, instead of saying, well, yeah, we literally are reborn, or there's a literal thing called karma, they say that those things are metaphors for something else. Maybe they're metaphors or ways of talking about the way the mind works, or way of talking about the way our psychology works. So when I say psychological or metaphorical, I really mean those as the same thing. In other words, they're metaphorical, these interpretations, because they're not literal, and they're psychological because they say that actually these teachings about rebirth are to do with our own minds and how they work. They're not to do with really being reborn or really having this magical thing called karma. So that's what this lesson's about. So first thing in your notes, I would write down these three sentences at the top. Many secular Buddhists in the West do not accept Buddhist teachings about samsara in a literal way. However, this does not necessarily mean that they completely reject the teachings of karma, rebirth, and so on and so on. You might get some Western secular Buddhists who just say, well, I'm just not interested in them at all. However, more often people interpret these teachings psychologically or metaphorically, and metaphorically, I should say. So they reinterpret them psychologically and metaphorically. And then what I'm going to do is I want you to turn to the first reading I've given you, the reading on, it's called Secular Buddhism and Samsara. And I've just taken quotes from a few secular Buddhist authors. There is one here who's not a secular Buddhist, but you'll see when you read it why I've included this person. I've got a series of quotes. For dependent origination, I couldn't find a quote, so I just kind of explained the reinterpretation they give. And so for each of these quotes, or the bit of writing I've done, it gives a particular interpretation of what we mean by, what Western Buddhists, what secular Buddhists mean by karma, the realms of rebirth, the idea of rebirth itself, and dependent origination. So for each one, I want you just to make notes on it. When I say make notes, what I mean is don't write down the full thing or make notes on everything. Just give me something really simple, a simple explanation, one or two sentences about how they reinterpret karma or the realms of rebirth or the idea of rebirth or dependent origination. So a couple of sentences is what we want to see, just to have something really clear. Include the name of the person so that you can, not going to put a quote in, but so that you can reference that person if you talk about them in an essay. So what I want you to do is just pause the video now, read through that thing and see if you can summarize each teaching, each idea from each person. So in other words, how do they reinterpret these four different things? Pause the video and then when you come back, we'll do a bit of feedback on them. So let's just feedback. You should have done those notes now. So let's just feedback. So this first person, Divan Thomas Jones, how do they interpret karma? Well, they interpret it in a purely psychological way. So the idea is that instead of karma being some kind of magical force, whereby if you do good things, something good happens to you, kind of some good external reward happens to you, like you get a load of money or something. Instead of something like that, or you get a good rebirth, you've been reborn as a rich person. Instead of that, they interpret karma to be just about how your actions have an effect on your mind in the future. So if you're generous, you feel happy and at peace. If you're greedy, then you feel nervous and anxious and guilty and all those kind of things. So yes, it's about the idea that that your actions have an effect, but those effects are in your mind, not external to you. Okay, 6 realms of rebirth. Well, you had these two people, Diane St. Ruth and Jamie Gargut, I think it is. But both of them have a similar idea, and that is that the realms of rebirth are not places you get reborn after you die, but they are realms that you can find yourself in this life. So so sometimes you're like a hungry ghost because you're craving after things and can't be satisfied. Sometimes you're in the hell realm because you feel really awful and guilty about stuff that you've done. Sometimes you're in the animal realm because you're just living on your instincts. Sometimes you feel like a god because you've done great stuff, and so you feel really relaxed and happy. And then, sometimes you're in the middle and you're a human. So that's the idea, that the 6 realms of rebirth are different states of mind you can be in. What about rebirth? Now, it's important to note that Ayakema, a famous Buddhist teacher, is not a secular Buddhist because she does believe in these things literally. But this is an interesting point, is that we'll talk about this later, but the psychological interpretations of the teachings of samsara that Western Buddhists have are not unknown in mainstream Buddhism or traditional Buddhism. They do have those interpretations. It's just that a traditional Buddhist would say, yes, the 6 realms of rebirth, we can look at it in that way, that we go through those realms in our everyday life, but also it's somewhere you can get reborn. And same with karma. A traditional Buddhist would say, yes, the actions you do have an effect on your mind in this life. If you're generous, it does make you have more peace of mind, but it also has a more kind of supernatural effect in that you get certain rewards or punishments based on your actions. So it's not like traditional Buddhists don't believe in these psychological interpretations. They just think that that's not the only interpretation you can have. So, but I've put this thing by Ayakema in because Ayakema is because he's a famous Buddhist teacher, and also because I couldn't find anything talking directly just about rebirth in Western Buddhist, just a secular Buddhist talking about rebirth. But I think her interpretation, the way she thinks about it, moment by moment rebirth, would be the main interpretation for many secular Buddhists. So what she's saying, well, psychologically, we are actually reborn every moment. It actually links into the teaching of anatta, right? Because anatta says that we are not the same person one moment to another. There's nothing nothing fixed about our personality or who we are. So Buddhists would say, actually, you don't just get reborn when you die. You're reborn moment by moment. Moment by moment, you're a different person, and the person you are now is dependent on the actions of the person you were before. So you're constantly being reborn, according to secular Buddhists. Okay, dependent origination. So again, dependent origination would be something, again, that would happen moment by moment. So the 12 links, ignorance and craving leading to attachment and suffering, that happens, it goes on again and again and again, but we don't need to think of it over rebirth. We just need to think of it as something that happens right now, in our life right now. So those are the secular and the metaphorical and psychological interpretations of the teachings of karma. Now, so we've seen what Western Buddhists do, or secular Buddhists, I should say, do. They reinterpret the teachings to take out all the supernatural stuff. They still think those teachings are relevant, but they just don't think we should interpret them in a supernatural way. They're psychological teachings. The question is, are they justified in looking at Buddhism in this way? Does that make them not really Buddhist if they don't believe in rebirth? Or is it legitimate to look at Buddhism in that way? The first thing I'm going to do to answer that question is to look at the Kalama Sutta. This is a part of the Pali Canon that we've discussed before a few times. It's really, really important teaching, particularly for secular Buddhists. So if you look at the reading called something like the Kalama Sutta and Secular Buddhism, something like that. And all we're going to do is read through the reading and then answer some questions based on what I say in this video. So have a look. So the Kalama Sutta is this teaching. A bit more of a description is on your sheet there, but basically, in the teaching, which is in the Pali Canon, the Buddha goes to this village and meets this group of people called the Kalamas, and the Kalamas say, well, you know what, we've had loads of religious teachers coming through this way, teaching us different things. That would be pretty common at that time because, we've looked at when the Buddha lived, there was this Samana movements, lots of different wandering holy men teaching different things. And so they said, look, we're confused. How do we decide who we should follow, which teachings are good? Because everyone tells us different things. And that's when the Buddha says one of the most famous quotes. So he says this, come, Kalamas, Do not go upon what has been acquired by repeated hearing, nor upon tradition, nor upon rumour, nor upon what is in the scripture, nor upon surmise, nor upon an axiom, nor upon specious reasoning, nor upon a bias towards a notion that has been pondered over, nor upon another's seeming ability, nor upon the consideration, this monk is our teacher. Calmers, when you yourself know these things are good, these things are not blamable, these things are praised by the wise, undertaken and observed, these things lead to benefit and happiness, enter on and abide in them. Now, why do secular Buddhists think this teaching shows that Buddhists do not need to believe in karma and rebirth? Well, this is often taken as a sign that Buddhism is a non-dogmatic religion. So a dogmatic means a religion that believes in very fixed beliefs, things you have to believe. And it comes from Christianity, which has often been in the past a religion which is very keen on fixed belief. There's certain things you have to believe, particularly within the Catholic Church. That's where the word dogma, which you get dogmatism or dogmatic, comes from. Now, so this quote is often used to say, well, Buddhism's not like that. It doesn't say you have to believe in things just because we teach them. And if you look at the quote, you can see that, there's, my voice went very high there. You can see that there's lots of things he says here which suggest that Buddhists should not just accept the teachings of Buddhism just because the Buddha's taught them. So it says, don't accept things, don't go upon, it lists lots of things, but I'm going to pick some out. Don't go upon what's in a scripture. So don't just accept things because they're in a scripture. Do not accept things on the consideration, this monk is our teacher. So don't accept them just because a famous monk has taught them or the Buddha has taught them. Or upon tradition, just because Buddhism's always taught it. So these things make secular Buddhists think, oh, well, Buddhism, the Buddha didn't believe that you should just believe everything that he taught. He might have taught rebirth and karma, but he didn't say that we had to believe it. And then at the end, it seems to suggest, well, what you need to do is when you actually know that these things are good, these teachings are good and worthwhile and lead to happiness, then you should follow them. So what the secular Buddhists might say is, look, when we've put things into practice and thought about them and pondered them over, we've come to the decision we don't need those teachings of karma and rebirth, we can reinterpret them. We don't need to believe in literal karma and rebirth. We can just interpret them psychologically. And they would say, look, well, we're free to do that because the Buddha said, put it into practice and see for yourself. Don't just believe because I said so. However, there's another question here. Why do Richard Gombrich and Bhikkhu Bodhi think that the secular Buddhist interpretation of this teaching is wrong? So Richard Gombrich, a scholar of Buddhism. Bhikkhu Bodhi is a Buddhist monk, famous writer. I think we talked about it when we talked about meditation. They both critical of the secular Buddhist interpretation of this teaching. And that is because they say that if you read the context of the teaching and what the Buddha goes on to say is that what the Buddha is not saying, oh, well, you can just believe whatever you want. Just, try things out and just pick and choose whatever you want, you can believe it. What the Buddha's actually saying is you shouldn't believe for that reason, just because I've said so. But if you put his teachings into practice, you will find that they are true. So that's his idea. The idea of the original scripture, according to Bhikkhu Bodhi and Richard Gombrich, and I think they've got a point here, is that the Buddha wasn't just going in and saying, well, yeah, you can just believe whatever you want, just take whatever's useful. No, he was saying, look, the way you find out what's true isn't just by trusting people, but by putting into practice and see what's true. But he would argue, if you put it into practice, you would see that his teachings were true, and therefore that karma and rebirth was actually true. If you put it in practice. And that links in with Buddhist teaching, because Buddhism says that once you get to enlightenment, you will see that karma and rebirth are true. That's what the Buddha saw when he was enlightened. So, yeah, the interpretation is wrong because the Buddha didn't think that once you put things into practice, you could just pick what you wanted. No, when you put them into practice, you would find that Buddhism has the true teachings. They are the real teachings. So the phrase that Richard Gombrich used to describe this is that the Buddha is not saying make your own teachings. He is saying make the teachings your own. What he means by that is he's not saying you can just make up anything you want, but he is saying that instead of just accepting the teachings because they're in a book or someone said them, you need to make them your own, put them into practice and see for yourself that they work. But he was certain that if you put them into practice, you would see that he was right. Hope that makes sense. Okay, on the other side of your sheet, you should see this. So later on in the Kalama Sutta, the Buddha goes on a long talk about teachings, and he says this, which is a quite interesting section where he talks about if you follow his teachings, there are certain benefits or solaces. A solace means something to comfort you. So if you find solace in something, you find some comfort. So when he says there are solaces or comforts, what he means is there are certain things that you can think if you practice his teachings which will bring you comfort. Certain things that show that it's good to practice his teachings. Now there are 4 solaces, but only the first 2 concern us. So let's just read it through. The disciple of the noble ones, Kalamas, who has such a hate-free mind, such a malice-free mind, such an undefiled mind, and such a purified mind. By that he means the people who practice Buddhism, who've practiced meditation and all the things you need to do in meditation, and good conduct and the Eightfold Path, basically. If you've done all that stuff, you'll have this malice-free mind, this purified mind. So someone who follows Buddhism basically is one by whom 4 solaces are found here and now. So there's 4 ways you can get comfort here and now if you've done that. First one, suppose there is a hereafter and there is a fruit result of deeds done well or ill. Then it is possible that at the dissolution of the body after death, I shall arise in the heavenly world, which is possessed of the states of bliss. This is the first solace found by him. So this one is saying, if there is a hereafter, that means an afterlife. So if rebirth is real and there is fruit result of deeds done well or ill, in other words, if there's karma. So he's saying if karma and rebirth are real, then it is possible then when he dies, you'll be reborn in a heavenly realm. So in other words, he's saying if you follow Buddhism in this life and be a good person and do everything that Buddhism recommends, then one way you can get comfort is that you know that if there is rebirth, you will get a good rebirth, probably in the God realm. That's his first thing. Then he says this, suppose there is no hereafter and there is no fruit, no result of deeds done well or ill. Yet in this world, here and now, free from hatred, free from malice, safe and sound and happy, I keep myself. This is the second solace found by him. So what's he saying here? Well, he's saying, well, okay, if there is a rebirth and karma, you'll get a good rebirth. But here he's saying, if there's no karma and rebirth, you'll still get benefits. There's still a comfort to be taken from following the teachings of the Buddha, because you'll be happy in this life, in this world, here and now, free from hatred, free from malice, safe and sound and happy I keep myself. So what's the Buddha saying in this teaching? He's saying that his teaching leads to benefits and happiness, whether there is rebirth or whether there's not rebirth. Even if rebirth is not real, even though he believes rebirth is real, but even if it wasn't real, you would still get happiness and benefits from following his teachings. Now, why is this teaching important to secular Buddhists? Well, it seems to prove that you don't need to believe in rebirth to practice the Buddha's teachings, because he said here, you will benefit from them and be happy in this life, even if there is no afterlife. So this is an interesting thing, that teaching has definitely been used, whether they're right to or not, by secular Buddhists to say, look, we don't need to believe in rebirth and karma to be Buddhists, or we don't need to believe in them in a literal way. Okay, continuing on from this, we're going to look at this guy, Stephen Batchelor. Stephen Batchelor is the most famous example of a secular Buddhist, especially, definitely in this country, he's the most famous. First thing you can do is watch this clip. I think we watched it at GCSE, with Stephen Batchelor talking about his life. He used to be a monk, Zen monk. Well, he was a Tibetan monk and later a Zen monk. And then he became a secular Buddhist. And, you know, I want you to think, what does he believe? Can he really be called a Buddhist? So just pause this video, watch the link, which I'll put underneath this video, and then just think about it. What does he believe? Can he be called a Buddhist? And then just come back to this video when you've watched that clip. Okay, hopefully you've watched the clip. Now you can see he is someone who had a problem when he was a Buddhist monk of not believing in rebirth, not believing in literally in karma and rebirth. And so, you know, it raises that question, doesn't he? Is he a real Buddhist or not? And we're gonna like take a bit of time to go into his teachings and why he doesn't believe in rebirth and what he says about rebirth, partly because it's relevant for what we're doing right now, but partly because we will look at Stephen Batchelor in more depth in year 13, so it's good to have looked at him a bit so far. So here's a little bit about him. It'd be good to take some notes down. You don't have to write anything, maybe pick out like 4 or 5 key facts here. He was born in Scotland and raised in England. When he was 18 years old, let's see, when were he 18 years old? So 63, 71. So this is like the height of the hippie era. I think he mentions it on the video. He travelled to India. That was a big thing to do at that time. He settled in the exiled Tibetan community in Dharamsala and became a Buddhist monk. So why is in a Tibetan community when it's in India? Well, Tibet and India are near to each other. And the recent history of Tibet is that Tibet was an independent country at one stage, and then it was overtaken by China. It's now part of China. There's a lot of disagreement about whether historically it was an independent country, it was part of China, and so on and so on. But the leader of Tibet at that time, the Dalai Lama, who was a Buddhist monk, he didn't want to be ruled over by China. He believed in an independent Tibet, and eventually he fled from Tibet along with many Tibetan people and many of the monks, and they created a community of refugees, Tibetan refugees in Dharamsala in India, and in a way that's a kind of central place for Tibetans now, because the Dalai Lama is traditionally their head, and so many Tibetans live there. So he became a monk amongst that community. He fully embraced Buddhist practice, particularly meditation, but he had some doubts about key Buddhist teachings, especially karma and rebirth. In 1981, he stopped being a Tibetan monk and became a monk in the Rinzai Zen tradition in Japan. We've talked about Rinzai Zen with koans and things like that. In 1985, he disrobed. That means he stopped being a monk and he got married. Since this time, he's been a teacher of Buddhism and meditation, as well as an author. He identifies as a secular Buddhist and is certainly the most famous Buddhist in this category. And his most famous books include Buddhism Without Beliefs, a very, very famous book amongst Buddhists, and Confessions of a Buddhist Atheist, and another book called After Buddhism. So he writes lots of books about how to reinterpret Buddhism in the modern world. So yeah, just have a couple of notes down, 4 things maybe about him. Now, to understand this next bit of the lesson, the kind of final task of the lesson is going to be based on a reading, and that reading is going to be an article by Stephen Batchelor about rebirth and what the reasons he has for not believing in it, and he also looks at some of the reasons why people do believe in it, so that you can look at both sides of the coin. Now he starts by looking at an interesting case, the case of Lama Ozel. Now Lama Ozel, you can see there is that little kid there on the bottom left. It is also that grown-up person on the bottom right. That is him as an adult, not dressed so much like a Buddhist monk there. Now, Lama Ozel. A lama is a Tibetan term for a teacher. Usually, they don't have to be monks, but often they are. Usually they are. So a lama is a word for a teacher. It's not like the animal. It's only got one L. Lama. Now, in Tibet, they have a particular idea, and that is that certain famous teachers, certain famous lamas, religious teachers, will be reborn, just like everyone is, but that their reincarnations can be identified, and that you can find where they were reborn and identify that this is the rebirth of the previous teaching. And that's been something that's common in Tibetan history, most famously with the Dalai Lama. So the Dalai Lama is the head of Tibet, traditionally. He's a senior monk in Tibetan Buddhism, but he's also the political head of Tibet, or has been in the past. And when a Dalai Lama dies, what they do is they use various methods to find out where the next Dalai Lama has been born. And then when they find that new Dalai Lama, like a little kid who's been reborn, they then do tests to check whether this is the Dalai Lama, and those tests are based on whether the kid can remember things from its previous life. So it's quite an interesting process. Now, that's the Dalai Lama. He's like the most famous of these reincarnated lamas, but there are others who get reincarnated, and one of them was this Lama Yeshe. He's the Buddhist monk you can see at the top there. Lama Yeshe was a Tibetan Buddhist monk who had a lot of followers because the Tibetan community went into exile from Tibet. That means Tibetans, monks, have travelled all throughout the world, and so they have many followers all over the world, including in the West. This Lama Yeshe had many followers in Spain. And when he died, they went through the process of identifying his successor, and they identified his successor as a Spanish boy. And that's this boy here, Lama Ozel. So he was identified as the reincarnation of Lama Yeshe after he died. And they did various things to test whether he really was the reincarnation. And then, he when it was decided that he went to live as a monk, and was trained as a monk and educated as a monk and raised in that way. It's quite an interesting thing. There's lots of stuff on the internet to find out about him, because it kind of seemed to go through different phases, where when he grew up, deciding whether he wanted to stay as a Buddhist teacher or not, and all that kind of thing. But what I want you to do first of all is to watch this video. This video clip, it basically is a clip and I'll put this underneath the video. It's basically a clip of a documentary. I don't know if the documentary's ever been actually made, but it was certainly planned, a documentary about him now that he's grown up. And it's quite interesting because it just gives you a bit of background, and you can see him, and you can see some footage of when he was a little kid. Just to kind of put in context who we're talking about here, this Lama Osil kid. Now, the reason I want you to understand who he is because in Stephen Batchelor's article that you're going to read, he talks about Lama Osil, and he talks about how they confirmed that this really was Lama Osil, and what he thinks about it, why he's not sure that it really proves that he is a reincarnation. And he talks about how he met Lama Osil and the experience he had meeting him. So yeah, I think that's quite an interesting bit of background on the case. Okay, so when you've watched that video, we're going to move on to the next reading. So this is your last reading. Now, this is quite a long reading. I'm giving you this article by Stephen Batchelor called Rebirth, A Case for Buddhist Agnosticism. It is a long article. I want you to read the whole thing, but to make it, and I want you to answer some questions, but to make it a little bit more straightforward, what I've done is I've highlighted various parts of the article where the information that answers the questions is to be found, because there are some bits that go into sort of detail that you don't necessarily need to know, and you might find a little bit bogged down, especially with a lot of the technical Buddhist terminology. So read the whole article, but when you're trying to answer the questions, focus on the areas that are highlighted. Now, what I've done is I've highlighted in different colours, and then I've put the questions, like on the list of questions it says blue section, and it tells you what question you need to answer for that. Red section, you need to answer this question. So it should make it easier, because it means it narrows down where you are looking for the information to answer your question. But that's going to be our last task for this lesson, just basically making notes on that article, answering those questions, which really in the back of your mind you want to be thinking, what does he give good reasons for not believing in rebirth? What reasons do other people give for believing in it? Can you be a Buddhist without believing in rebirth? Does he make a good case for saying, well, you can be a Buddhist without believing in rebirth? Does it make sense what he's saying? That's the in the background as we look at this article. Okay, that's all for now, guys. If you've got any questions, do get in touch. Email me or whatever you need to do. Okay, bye.